Hi, this is Ann V. Brady, and I will be reading an excerpt from my book, A New Beginning, the story of my adoption, life, and service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. We all drove back to Williston Park so Ed and I could pack before leaving for Fort Gordon, Georgia. I gave our address and phone number to my family so we could stay in touch. My dad gave Ed directions to the freeway before we left. He told us what signs to look out for. We finally hit we finally hit the road. Following my dad's directions. Signs in New York are confusing even to New Yorkers. We ended up in the bad part of Brooklyn. We drove around looking for a gas station so we could get directions to the freeway. We finally found a gas station and got our directions. We made it to the freeway and headed south. I told Ed that we would have to keep the windows closed when we got to New Jersey. I explained that we would be passing by oil storage tanks for gas companies and that the area would stink. It was a long trip, though we did stop at night. We stayed at a cheap local motel to save money. We finally made it home, and I called the orderly room to sign back in off of leave. We had several neighbors that we became friends with. Brad and Joyce lived near us, and Joyce worked in the clinical laboratory in Dwight David Eisenhower Army Medical Center, GDMAC. One day I was informed that I was being transferred to the clinical laboratory. They didn't tell me why I was being transferred. I started out training in phlebotomy in the phlebotomy room drawing blood. I worked there several weeks learning how to draw blood and wake up patients who had passed out. I also learned how to perform a bleeding time test. Then I was put in the urinalysis section to learn how to perform urinalysis tests. I had to learn how to perform quality control on the urinalysis machine, how to read dipsticks, and use a microscope. If I had abnormal test results on the urine, I had to look at the urine under the microscope. I had to look for crystals, blood cells, and bacteria in the urine. I also had to call the doctor or clinic if I had any panic results. I rotated between the phlebotomy room and the urinalysis room. I shared the urinalysis room with specimen receiving. The civilian who ran the specimen receiving was an older woman, about in her 40s or 50s. She would separate specimens according to departments such as chemistry, hematology, and special chemistry. She was a friendly woman. She also knew how many tubes and what type of tubes we needed when we had to draw blood for multiple tests. Sometimes doctors would order 7 or 8 tests. So we would ask her if any of the tests could be combined in a tube and also any special type of tube for an unusual test. Occasionally, the lab supervisor would come in and talk to her. While I was performing tests on urine, I would hear him tell her that maybe someday Specialist Newman will be saved. I just ignored the SFC, but I thought it was unprofessional to say the least. He was a born-again Christian and annoying. I bought a Southern cookbook so I could cook Ed some Southern meals. Ed was born in Pensacola, Florida, but he was raised in Virginia, Alabama, and Georgia. I discovered that the meals in the book took hours. I started looking through the book and realized I had made a mistake. I discovered that the meals in the book took hours, if not days, to prepare. Some recipes called for multiple stages. Mix ingredients, put in bowl, store for 3 hours or a day in a warm, dark place. Add more ingredients, stick in the fridge for 5 hours, add more ingredients, and cook. I was working from 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., so I had no time to make those kinds of meals. The book ended up in the trash. Sometime during the summer months, National Guard showed up for their 2-week annual training. I helped show the guardsmen how to draw blood. They were to observe the first day, then draw blood the next couple of days. One guardsman was a particular jerk. I was drawing blood from a soldier who had a very large vein. I used a regular needle, but the vein collapsed. I pulled it out and went to get a smaller needle. The guardsman looked at me and said, "I'll do it. I can't believe you missed it." He ended up sticking this soldier 3 more times using a big needle. I finally went to our supervisor and told him what was going on, and that I thought a small needle was needed because the big needle caused his vein to collapse. His supervisor went to see what was going on. He stopped the guardsman and got a small needle and was able to draw the blood. The following week, I was rotated back to urinalysis. While I was looking at a slide, in walked the same guardsman from the phlebotomy room. He walked into the room and asked me if I knew what I was doing. I continued to ignore him while my mentor told him that I was perfectly qualified. The Spec 5 told the guardsman that I had been working in urinalysis for weeks and knew what I was doing. He also told him that considering he didn't work in the lab while he was a civilian, that he didn't have the expertise to criticize me. Most of the National Guardsmen worked in a different job in civilian life than what they did in the National Guard. Guardsman left me alone after that and spent his time trying to learn his job in the laboratory. Ed and I decided that because a lot of the residents in the trailer park didn't have phones, we would let the military members use our phone number in case of alerts from their companies. One morning about 2 a.m., the phone rang. I let it ring, figuring that it was the wrong number. I got up to answer the phone, thinking that it was an alert call. I answered the phone while Ed got dressed. When I answered the phone, I got the shock of my life. It was an obscene phone call with the guy on the other end telling me what he wanted to do to me. Ed asked me who it was. I put my hand over the speaker part of the phone and told him it was an obscene phone call. I motioned for him to come to me. I gave the phone to Ed and he proceeded to cuss the man out. Needless to say, the caller immediately hung up. That was the last obscene call I ever got. In August, I took leave and Ed and I went to visit Canton, Georgia, so I could meet his family. The reception I received from his parents was so much different than the reception Ed received from my mom and brothers. Anita and Don Brady were pleased to meet me. They thought I was a good influence on Ed and had saved him. Ed and his father made up while we visited them. Ed's dad asked him to help him with detailing his van. Ed and his dad started to get closer in their relationship. They treated me and below is a picture of Don's van. It's a black van with red detailing that Ed helped Don put on. And that's it. They treated me like I was their daughter. I enjoyed meeting Don and Anita. They told us all the gossip of Canton. They told us that Ed's brother Kevin was going to join the Marines in September. I was sorry to say goodbye to them. When we got back to Grovetown, I went back to work in the lab. I rotated next to hematology. In hematology, I learned how to process and run CBCs and became proficient in making blood smears. Eventually, when I became proficient performing CBC tests, they showed me how to perform APTT and PT tests. I then rotated to chemistry. I learned how to run chemistry panels on a chemistry analyzer. I enjoyed working in the lab and learning new procedures. I rotated next to special chemistry, where we did specialized tests on urine samples. We performed creatinine tests on 24-hour urine samples, among other tests. After I had rotated through different departments over 6 months' time, I started working in the stat lab. We did CBCs, chemistry panels, and urinalysis on specimens that needed to be done right away. As soon as we got the results, we would have to call the clinic or doctor with the results. I enjoyed working in the stat lab, even though it was fast-paced, followed by lulls in work. One day, a civilian asked me a question. She asked me if I was Catholic. I said yes. She then asked me if Catholics worship Mary, Jesus' mother. I explained that we don't worship Mary, We honor her because she's Jesus' mother. She asked why we prayed to her. I told her to think about it as asking her to talk to God for us. I told her it was like, as a kid, you want to ask your father to go to a party. You're afraid to ask him directly because you're afraid he will say no. So you ask your mother to talk to your father into letting you go to the party. You figure if your mother intercedes for you, your father is more likely to say yes. She understood what I was saying. One day she brought me a comic book that another civilian had given her. She wanted to know if what it said was true about the Catholic Church. The woman that gave her the comic was an ex-Catholic. I read the comic and then explained to her that nothing in the comic was true and how it was wrong. It was very anti-Catholic and filled with hate. Edward helped the owner of the trailer park with fixing problems tenants were having with their trailers, such as problems with the toilets, etc. Eventually, the owner and her boyfriend asked Ed to become the manager of the trailer park. They wrote up a contract for Ed. When we looked it over, I pointed out that the contract had ended before it started. When I mentioned this, I was told not to worry about it. It wasn't important. Ed signed the contract and became the manager of the trailer park. Turned out it was important because Ed had to buy all the tools and need supplies to fix things without reimbursement from the owner of the trailer park. He was responsible for all repairs. Ed not only repaired appliances and toilets in the trailers, he also collected rent for the owner. Ed would take me to work first thing in the morning and pick me up in the afternoon from the hospital lab. Sometimes he would go over to the day room and play pool. The day room had a beer dispenser along with a soft drink dispenser. One day, I left early to go to a dental appointment. When I came out, an old friend of mine from Ramsey, Alex, was there in the waiting room. Alex said he had stopped by the lab and was told that I was here. He said he asked an older woman in the lab where where Ann Newman was. She told him she thought my last name used to be Newman. Alex had hitched rides from Washington to see me. We talked and I told him I was now married. He asked me if I could drop him off at a truck stop so he could hitch rides back to Washington. He said there was no reason for him to stay as I was married. We walked back to the lab where I called Ed and asked him if we could drop Alex, an old friend of mine, Alex, off at a truck stop so he could get back to Washington. He wasn't happy about it, and Alex wasn't either, but it was the only way Alex could get to the truck stop. Ed picked us both up outside the hospital. I introduced them to each other. It was awkward at first. On the way to the truck stop, they compared notes on me, which I silently had to put up with. We dropped Alex off at the truck stop and said our goodbyes and wished him a good trip. I got a weird call at home from some guy asking me if I was Ann Brady. I said I was, and he proceeded to tell me what a great time he had with me over Labor Day at Clark's Hill. He was wondering if we could get together again sometime. I was totally confused. I told him that the only time I'd ever gone to Clark's Hill was with my husband, and I didn't know who he was. I told him that there must be another Ann Brady that he had met. He apologized and hung up. I decided to apply to one of the local colleges to see if I could go for my master's degree. I filled out the paperwork to get a master's in biology. After several months, I received a letter from the head of the biology department who rejected my application. I called the biology department and spoke to the head of the biology department. I asked him why I was rejected from the program. He told me it was because I was in the military. About once a week, I would call my parents just to see how they were and what was going on in the family. Every time I called, though, my mom would answer the phone with, "What's wrong?" About once a week, I was told her that Nothing was wrong. I was just calling to say hi. She then would berate Ed, and I would tell her to leave him alone. I would get upset after the call, so I started listening the calls home. Finally, one night when I called, I had enough of her berating Ed and saying how bad he was. I told her that if she had nothing good to say about Ed, then she should say nothing at all. I started calling home less and less because I didn't want to hear my mom berate Ed. As winter came along, we had a lot of icy roads. We received a couple inches of snow, so a group of us at the trailer park decided to build a snowman. Each couple rolled a giant snowball to help build the snowman. It was one of the dirtiest snowmen I had ever seen. Below are pictures of Ed with one of the giant snowballs for the bottom of the snowman, and there are people in the background that were helping to collect snowballs. And the second picture is a picture of Ed and I with another couple and our snowman, all decorated and dirty. As Christmas neared, we prepared to enjoy our first Christmas together. I took I took leave for a week. I applied for it in November. Ed went out into the woods to look for a Christmas tree. He finally found a small but decent tree. When we put the tree in the tree stand, we noticed one side had a gap. Ed cut some limbs from the back to fill in the gap, and we scotch taped the branches to the front of the tree. We then turned the slightly barren side to the wall. We decorated the tree with lights, ornaments, and tinsel. One day, I was writing Christmas cards to send to our families. The phone rang and I answered it. I was surprised when a tenant of the trailer park asked me what I was doing home. She then asked to speak to Ed. I handed the phone to Ed. Tenant wanted Ed to take her kids and drop them off at school. They had come home for lunch. Ed told her that he couldn't do that. After lunch, her sons walked in the trailer without knocking. They told Ed that their mom sent them, saying that we would take them to school. Ed sent them back home. She came running up to the trailer, demanding that Ed take her sons to school. He explained that he couldn't. And he said, I already told you I wasn't taking them to school, and you shouldn't have sent them here. We exchanged presents, and our parents sent us presents too. At work, the lab supervisor was complaining that his wife had gotten a temporary job. She wanted to buy a special Christmas present for him. As pastor, he believed that women didn't work. They stayed at home and cleaned house and cooked. He told us all he wasn't cooking dinners for his family. He was taking them out to dinner because he was mad at his wife. In the mornings, driving to work, the guinea hens were really noisy. They sounded awful. There were houses near us that had a communal cow. They shared the cow, and each morning you would see the cow in a different backyard. Driving could be dangerous because of icy roads. The worst was black ice on the roads. Usually, when we got snow, it was a combination of snow and sleet. Occasionally, we invited some of the tenants who were our friends to come and watch movies with us. One night, a female tenant walked into our trailer while we were watching a movie without knocking. We told her that she shouldn't just barge into our trailer like that. She needed to knock first. This was the second time she had done this. Around springtime, the lab guy knew Sergeant H. He seemed nice enough and was friendly. He became good friends with Brad and Joyce. Sometimes he would bring me urine specimens when he went up front to get his specimens. One day he called out to me and yelled, "Here, catch!" He threw a urine sample to me, expecting me to catch it. He was lucky the specimen cup didn't spill or leak. I was upset by this because it was very unsanitary and unprofessional. Several weeks later, I came back from lunch and was setting up specimens to perform urinalysis on. Sergeant H walked into the urinalysis lab and stood there staring at me. Excuse me. That's better. I asked him if I could help him. He said, "No, I'm just looking." I mentioned it to Ed when I got home. Okay, that's all for today. And I'll read some more tomorrow. I hope everybody has a good day.